Okay, so our next presenter is Matthias Wichtelhuber. He's doing a PhD. He's done a PhD at Darmstadt. He's a senior researcher at DKIX, which is the operator of many of the world's largest internet exchange points. His research interests are in large-scale traffic engineering and traffic analysis. So take it away.
Welcome, everybody. So this is a joint work with appreciated colleagues from DKIX and Brandenburg University of Technology in Cottbus, both in Germany. And I will directly jump into the motivation. So you're probably all aware that distributed denial of service is an ongoing problem on the internet. Cisco is projecting 14% of compound annual growth rate with millions of attacks per day. And one particularly worrisome development over the past few years is that there is essentially no technical expertise anymore needed to conduct these attacks, which makes them ideal for extortion at scale. So, of course, there are numerous approaches to mitigate DDoS attacks. You may ask yourself, why would I want to do that at an internet exchange point? So over the last few years, IXPs have become a very central part of the internet's topology. Some of them shift more than 10 terabits of peak traffic and connect more than 1,000 ASs. And we did a previous study on the topic to quantify the potential of dropping DDoS at internet exchange points, and we found that we could drop traffic 2 or more AS hops earlier in 55% of the attacks. And this would, in turn, remove stress from the edge infrastructure, and it would also allow to centralize complex DDoS traffic analysis, which many networks that have to do it at the edge don't have the capacity or the manpower to do it themselves. So in fact, we could move all of this a bit more into the core of the internet. So what are the contributions in this paper? So starting from this little toy model here, you see a small IXP that is connecting 4 ASs, and we're starting from the central assumption that IXPs transfer large amounts of inter-domain traffic, and this also includes quite a large share of DDoS. And what many IXPs actually implement already today is that ASs can mark DDoS traffic via a practice that is called BGP blackholing. So in fact, they can mark routes via BGP and announce by marking this route that they don't want to receive the traffic for this route. This is a standardized practice. There's also an RFC for that, and it's present at many internet exchange points around the world. And what we're actually contributing here is we're leveraging this mechanism to show how we can sample large DDoS training sets from blackholing traffic. In a second contribution, we on top create the self-learning and locally explainable IXP Scrubber machine learning model. And in a third step, we use the large data sets we generate with contribution 1 to extensively evaluate model drift across the time domain and across geographic domain with up to 2 years of data from 5 internet exchange points. So let's look how we leverage blackholing for labeling DDoS traces. So this figure on the right here shows how blackholing is commonly implemented at internet exchange points. So ASA here is under attack on the slide. And what it does is here, the AS announces a black hole, which is distributed by the IXP to ASB that is sending DDoS traffic. ASB accepts the blackholing route and it will drop the traffic before it even enters the IXP platform. However, there is a sizable amount of ASs that do not accept blackholing routes at internet exchange points. This is around 50% of the ASs, as we found in previous studies. And you might consider this a bug, but for us it's very good, because in this case, IXP members not accepting blackholing routes send unfiltered and unwanted traffic. And we can utilize this to correlate BGP and flow data to automatically generate DDoS labels. And in fact, this means that the training set size we can generate is only limited by the size of the BGP and flow data that we can get hold of. If we compare our data sets to what we find in the related work, you can easily see that we outperform the longest traces in literature by a factor of 11.5. However, this is not a limitation on principle. If we get more data, we can create longer training sets. So let's dive a bit more into the data sets that we're actually using here. The first one is the ML training set. This is created with the method that I've shown before. It contains 685 billion flow records from IXPs from the EU and US, between 3 and 24 months of data, and ranging from mid-sized to very large IXPs shifting more than 10 terabits of traffic. And we're using this data set for machine learning pipeline design, for training, and for general performance evaluation. However, as we're proposing a completely new sampling method here, we also want to make sure that we don't include any bias here. So we're using a second data set for validation. This is the self-attack set. This is collected with a completely different method, namely self-attacks on our own dedicated infrastructure with using DDoS for hire services. It's much smaller than the other set, but it's very useful to validate models trained on the ML training set to reduce the risk of introducing bias into the models. We did an extensive data set evaluation to show which challenges are in these sets. Actually, I want to just give you a short glimpse here. Here's a comparison of the self-attack set and the ML training set with respect to the sending services we find in there. And the first thing that is immediately apparent is that you can see a lot of the usual suspects here for DDoS, right? SNMP, DNS, CLDAP, so you have a very comparable traffic mix in these two classes. So that means it's useful, but there's also a challenge, and that is on the bottom right here. So blackholing data is impure because blackholing is a prefix-based mechanism, and if you block, you always block also benign traffic. So you block both. You block the benign traffic to the prefix, and you block the DDoS traffic to the prefix, and that also appears in our data. So you have around 15% possibly benign traffic, and we need to take that into account for the model design. So what does the ML model design here actually look like? So important note up front, this is the classification process. It's not the training. So what you see here is on the left, we are entering the pipeline with sampled flow data. And then we're essentially combining two different models in order to get the performance that we actually need. So the first one is the microscopic machine learning model. This model tags single flows if they are likely part of a DDoS attack. So this is on a per flow basis, actually. And this is actually the model that solves this impurity of blackholing data problem. So this is sort of a clustering, and it can identify what is likely to belong to an attack and what does not. Afterwards, we're aggregating the data to fingerprints per target. That means we're taking all the flows that are routed to one target, and we're creating a long fingerprint out of that. Also retaining the tags that we apply here on the left side. And then we apply a second model, which is the macroscopic ML model. And this one actually classifies the target into attacked and not attacked. So in this case, it would probably classify A as under attack and B as not under attack. And only if this model says yes, we are dropping the traffic that is actually matching the tags that we applied in the first step. So let's dive into these two parts of the model. So the microscopic level, that's the one that is actually taking the flows. So the goal here is to identify blackholing-prone flow clusters in the data. And what we're applying here is association rule mining, also known as frequent item sets. It's quite an old algorithm, but it's very effective. And it's commonly used in e-commerce for generating recommendations. For instance, things like customers buying milk also bought bread. This can be generated with this algorithm. However, we're asking the question the other way around. So we're asking the algorithm, for which header combinations would you recommend a black hole? And the result, you see the result here. So this example here shows what these rules look like. For instance, source port 389, packet size between 1,400 bytes. This is an LDAP attack. The algorithm would recommend a black hole for that. And the left part of this implication rule here is what is a tag signature for us. However, we are not accepting anything blindly that is coming out of this algorithm. So we have implemented a manual curation step with experts. We are supporting this with a user interface and by minimizing possible tag candidates. And what actually experts see here is, you can see the user interface here. They see essentially the left part of these rules over there, plus a bit of additional statistics that is very easy to grasp for them. And then they can decide whether they want to accept or decline this certain tag for dropping of them in the model. We have validated this with networking experts. Admittedly, it was a small number, but networking experts willing to participate in these type of studies are rare. So, but it shows that our approach was understandable and useful to them, and actually we found that it worked very well with them. On the macroscopic level, which is the one that actually classifies the target, the goal is to classify the host correctly. So is this host under attack or is it not under attack? And as we have very diverse data, also from different vantage points, we wanted to ensure that this works independent of the location and that the decisions also somehow remain explainable or interpretable. And what we came up with for that is weight of evidence encoding. This is a method that is coming from financial risk assessment. It's commonly used for credit scoring, for instance, so probably each of you has been subject to this at some point in their lifetime. And the idea is that we're applying a risk to every categorical that we see in the data. So, for instance, if a categorical is likely to appear in the data, this will get a positive risk score. For instance, that would be reflector IPs, that would be DDoS-prone protocols like NTP or SSDP. And if it's unlikely to appear in combination with a black hole, we would apply a negative risk score. For instance, popular DNS services like Quad8 or HTTP. That's the simple idea behind it. It's actually a bit of Bayesian statistics, so not very complex. But we are applying this before the classification, actually. So actually, our model always consists of two parts. There's a pre-processing step that is applying the weight of evidence encoding to all the categoricals in the data, and the classifier actually never sees categoricals, only weight of evidence risk scores. For instance, Quad8 would give a positive risk score to the classifier, protocol NTP probably a negative one. So let's have a look at general performance evaluation. So we evaluated 5 optimized ML classifiers on the whole data set, and it turned out that an algorithm named XGBoost, which was also mentioned in the presentation yesterday here, turned out to be best and has the highest overall performance. So on the complete data set, we reach an F1 score of more than 0.98. And actually, on the 7 most relevant DDoS attack vectors, we are even slightly better. As we have these long data sets, we could do a very thorough evaluation of retraining that you need to do. And in fact, we found that temporal model drift is in fact a problem with these models. So you cannot train on day 1 and predict on day 30. That will not work. And we evaluated several different strategies to do retraining and came up with daily retraining with sliding window, which was a winning strategy here. And there were interesting effects here. So if you look here at the plot at the right, you see the size of the sliding window, daily, weekly, or monthly, and the achieved performance at different points in time. And actually we found that the median is hardly affected by the window size here, so it doesn't matter too much whether you're looking at a day or a month. But a larger window is tremendously helpful to reduce negative outliers. So you have some days where classification performance really drops, and you can avoid this with a longer training window. The other evaluation that we did was model transfer, so that's geographic model drift. And we wanted to know, can we train in a classifier at one IXP and do the evaluation at another IXP, and how will that actually work? So what we did is we took the whole model, so the weight of evidence encoding and the classifier, we trained it at IXP A, then we transferred it to IXP B and evaluated how good the classification performance actually gets. And you can see the result here, and yellow is not that good or unacceptably bad. Actually, you see this does actually not work very well unless you're staying on the same IXP where you have also trained the data. So you see the diagonal here on the y-axis, you see the IXP used for training, and on the x-axis, the IXP used for evaluation. And this plot essentially shows that you can only get an acceptable performance for training and evaluation at the same internet exchange point. The model transfer, then we did a different experiment where we where we only transferred the classifier but kept the weight of evidence encoding actually local. So we split the model in two halves, only transferred the classifier and applied it on top of the local weight of evidence encoding at a different internet exchange point. And the outcome there was actually much better, up to the point where it becomes nearly irrelevant where you train the actual classifier as long as you have a very simple local weight of evidence encoding in place. So I guess time's up, right? So this shows that each IXP sees different DDoS vectors and attacking systems, and yeah, it shows that weight of evidence encoding is very useful to encapsulate local knowledge, actually. So as I guess time's up, I will simply leave this here. Those are the main contributions. We've shown how to generate large DDoS sets. We've shown our model, and we've shown how we evaluated it, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Yeah, Wenqing Huawei, thank you for the presentation, it's really nice. You mentioned earlier that about 50% of the ASS is not taking BGP Blackholing policy. Any thoughts on what's the reason behind, and whether the chances are higher that DDoS attack coming from these ASS? Thank you.
I don't think there's a correlation with more DDoS attacks from these ASs. I think there are a couple of reasons. Mainly it's often you have certain BGP policies in place at certain ASs. And the main problem here is that black holes usually are more specific than /24. And many ASs do not allow you do not accept ASs on principle that are more specific than /24. But 99% of the blackholing routes are /32, so it's essentially host routes because you want to protect a single system, right? And I think that's the main issue here, beyond a number of other issues that I probably am not aware of, like fat fingering configurations, not testing their stuff, all of kind of things might be possible there.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank the speaker.
One
more? Okay.
Yep.
One here. So Andrew Moore from Cambridge. This is really great, and the temporal and spatial study and relationship is particularly an insight. There was one little piece of information that came up in the cross-correlation figures. I think it's the previous slides to these. And actually, it's this IXP CE2. I noticed that in this one and in the predecessor, it's actually a really poor classification and evaluation for itself. You know, it's notably worse for itself in this diagonal, and in the previous diagonal, it's even worse again. I was wondering if you had an insight into why that was. Is it just a temporal problem that's come up? You know, you can sort of see it's, in contrast to the other five, it's a bit worse. Is that?
Yeah, I mean,
because I'm assuming this is representative, so was this a particularly?
I mean, one point here also is that these IXPs vary in size, right? So some of them see really a lot of data, others have less data, also less networks that are actually using blackholing at the IXP.
Well, can you be more specific about that one? Is that worse because it's really big or really small?
Which one?
CE2.
CE2, that one? Well, it's 0.97, I mean, that's acceptable, right? Or you mean like the transfer to the other IXPs?
I was thinking of in and of itself. It's notably worse than everything else.
You mean like on the diagonal?
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be a matter of size. I think this one was actually one of the very small ones.
Right. Yeah. There we go. There's the answer.
Okay. We're actually out of time, so I suggest we take the questions, other questions online. So let's thank the speaker again. Thank you.